Hi, folks, and welcome to the Meaningful Money Podcast. This is season 18, episode 5. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you put your finances in order. My name is Pete Matthew, and I'm going to share with you everything you need to know and everything you need to do to secure your financial future. I'm here to help you make sense of money. Here we are once again. Great to have you with me. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, in last week's Ultimate Guide to Investing, Part 1, I did my best to try and cover everything that you need to know about investing. And this week, we need to try and put that knowledge to work and cover everything that you need to do. Quite a big task, as you can imagine. So that's where we're going to try and go today and try and end up. After the main body of the show, as usual, I'll read a review that's been left out, announce what we're going to be talking about next week. But as ever, before all of that, remember this podcast continues to be brought to you with the help of my friends at Seven Investment Management. They've been helping me out here on Meaningful Money for ages, all the way back to the spring of 2011, nearly 10 years. So I'm super grateful to them for doing that. Please do check out what they're up to. They're at 7im.co.uk. That's the number 7im.co.uk. Go check them out. So we covered a lot of ground last week. Each of these ultimate guides is quite a hefty piece, but one thing I'm finding with them is that it's difficult to know what to put in and what to leave out, right? As ever, it's about finding a balance and hopefully sticking to the info that is most useful to most people. So as we get practical today, I'm going to try and make this the ultimate guide to investing for the masses, not for the few. So it won't be exhaustive. It can't possibly be. This would be a 6-hour podcast if it was exhaustive, and even then, it wouldn't be, right? But for most people, this, hopefully, is everything that you need to do when it comes to investing. So remember, notes and links from today's show, they're at the show notes, which is the only link you need to remember. So you don't need to remember anything else except this link. You don't need to write anything down. Everything you need is there. meaningfulmoney.tv/UG5 for Ultimate Guide Episode 5, right? meaningfulmoney.tv/UG5. There's a workbook there, which will basically cover last week and this week. It'll help you with everything we're talking about. It's free. It'll help you understand and apply everything that we're talking about in very practical ways. And also, stay tuned for more details on a special offer on the Build Wealth phase of Meaningful Academy, which is particularly pertinent to everything that we're talking about here. Goes into even more detail, lots of really practical, quickly actionable stuff in Meaningful Academy Build Wealth. Stay tuned for more on that later. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you could use the chapter markers to skip to the relevant points. You can do that on the audio player on the show notes page as well. With a deep breath. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Okay, everything you need to do when it comes to investing. Firstly, only hold the cash that you need. So we said last week, cash is not an investment. Say it with me, folks. Cash is not an investment. And again, by cash, I mean money held in a bank or a building society account or in premium bonds or other national savings products. Basically, anywhere that you're attracting interest, but the capital value stays the same. That's what I mean by cash. Interest rates have been historically low for ages now, well over a decade. But even if interest rates do rise in future, cash can never grow as such. Cash is for spending. That's all. And if that truly is its only purpose, then we shouldn't hold any more cash than is necessary, than we need to spend. So how much should we hold then? Well, I always counsel having an emergency fund on hand. That's a sum of money in a bank account, which is easily accessible to cover you if something unexpected happens, like a redundancy, large unexpected bill, global pandemic. Anyone? I'll say it again. The number one subject of emails that I've received in the last 6 months has been, thank God you told me to have an emergency fund. Right? An emergency fund puts a financial buffer between you and the world, and it means that you won't be forced either to rack up debt or to dip into investments if something goes awry. So figure on having 3 to 6 months of minimum monthly expenditure set aside for your emergency fund. More on that back in Ultimate Guides numbers 2 and 3. Links to that in the show notes. After that, look ahead. What big expenses are coming down the line at you? Do you have holidays booked? Big events or maintenance projects on the house? Do you want to buy a house and you're saving for a deposit? Simple rule of thumb is that any money that you're likely to need in the next 3 years should be held in cash. And I realize that will grate with many people who they don't like to see their money not working for them. But the purpose of keeping short-term money in cash is simply to make sure it's still there when you need it. The last thing you want is to be forced to dip into investments when they happen to be down, just because markets are blipping at the moment. Just because now is the time you found your dream house and you need to get the deposit together, if that coincides with a bad market dip, that's unfortunate. I mean, let's say you were given £10,000 for a house deposit by a relative, but at the time, you're not ready to buy yet. So you decide to invest that money while you wait. And then, lo and behold, the property of your dreams comes along in 6 months' time, by which point, unfortunately, your investment is down by 20% because you timed it badly. What a shame. So now, actually, you only have 8,000, not the 10,000 that you were given. That sucks. Or maybe you invested in a property fund and you can't get physically out that money for 6 months. Come back to a little bit about why that's the case a bit later. You know, that's not good. Don't invest money that you're going to need in the next 3 years. Just don't argue with me. I'm right. Okay? Any cash you have over and above your emergency fund and your short-term spending needs can be invested, because you'll know that, as far as you can tell, you're not going to need that money for at least 4 years, probably longer. So only keep the cash you need. Number 2, you only need 2 accounts. Right? When it comes to investing, there are various accounts, sometimes called tax wrappers, that you can choose from. But for most ordinary investors, there are really only 2 that matter, and that's a pension and an ISA. So I'm going to do an entire ultimate guide on wrappers and platforms next week. But for now, let's look briefly at these 2 key accounts, a pension and an ISA. So the only ISA that most of us needs is a stocks and shares ISA. That's for long-term savings, at least. If you're investing towards a house deposit one day, you should definitely consider a lifetime ISA, where the government adds 20%, 25% to whatever you put in to help you build a house deposit. The downside of those accounts is that you have to use it for a deposit on your first house, or you can leave it in there until age 60 and use it for retirement purposes. But if you access the money for any other reason, you're going to pay the government bonus back. The annual allowance into an ISA is £20,000 per person. So that means you can contribute 20 grand into your ISA accounts in any one tax year, and you can spread it across your different ISA accounts. So the maximum you can put into a lifetime ISA is £4,000 a year. And that means then that you could put up to £16,000 into another ISA. You can only pay into one of each type of ISA in any tax year, though. So you can't split your £20,000 between 2 stocks and shares ISAs. Cash ISAs are a thing as well. They're just an ISA bank account, really. But for the reasons we've just gone over in point 1, cash is not an investment. So only use a cash ISA or a cash lifetime ISA if your savings term is shorter than 3 years or so. ISAs are completely tax-free, which is a really cool benefit. You pay no tax as the money grows inside the account and no tax when you take it out. Usually there are no restrictions as to what you can take out and when, so they're really flexible. Some providers even offer flexible ISAs, capital F, where if you take out any money during the year and replace it within the same tax year, that doesn't actually affect your allowance. So let's say you've got 20,000 or so in an ISA and you have to take 5,000 out for some reason. That leaves you with 15. Then later on in that tax year, you can pay in £25,000. 5 grand is the money you took out earlier, and then the other 20,000 is your ordinary allowance for the year. So quite flexible. The other account that matters is a pension. Now, pensions are often considered to be complex beasts, and in many ways they are. Broadly speaking, pensions are divided into occupational plans, those provided by your employer, and personal plans, those you take out yourself. Taking occupational plans first, these come in 2 flavors. Defined benefit, where you'll end up with a guaranteed income one day based on your salary while you're working and the length of time that you've worked for your employer. The other type is defined contribution, where both you and your employer contribute into a pot. And what you get at the end is unknown, right? It just depends on how much you put in, how the money grows, and a few other variables besides. Defined benefit plans are in decline. They tend now to be the preserve of public sector employees like the NHS and the civil service and armed forces and things like that. If you've got one, they're extremely valuable. Now, personal plans, pensions you take out yourself, they are always defined contribution, right? It's all about how much you put in. And it's up to you to put in as much as possible to get the most out at the end. Pension plans attract tax relief. And in simple terms, that means the government essentially gives you some of your tax back to incentivize you to pay into a pension. You can even do that to a small extent, even if you're not a taxpayer at all. And that's a really useful benefit, and we'll see a bit more about that next week. While money is inside a pension plan, it grows tax-free, but there is some taxation when you take the money out. Right? You can't touch money in a pension under current rules until age 55. That age is rising. After 2028, it's going to rise to your state pension age minus 10 years. Pension funds and ISAs, they're just accounts. They are mechanisms for investing money for your future. What really matters, though, is what is inside those accounts, and more on that in just a sec. So, number 3, balance pension and ISA. Question I get asked extremely frequently is how much to pay into a pension and how much to pay into an ISA. So if you've got, say, 500 quid a month, say, available to invest for your future, what should the split be between the two accounts? Well, the answer, maddeningly enough, is it depends. Depends on your life stage, so how close you are to retirement. Depends on the provision available at work. Is there a pension scheme or not? Depends on your own circumstances. Maybe you don't work for somebody else, right? And you're your own boss in your own company or whatever, and so you've got to do all the running. Maybe you're expecting an inheritance in the near future, and that might change the split for you. In general terms, I tend to advise the following. If you are employed and there is a pension scheme at work, join it. Don't think about it. Don't and ah, just join it, right? Your employer is obliged to pay into a pension for you if you join it. So by not doing so, you are literally turning down free money from your boss. Pay into the pension the maximum that you can to attract the top level of match from your employer. So for example, the current rules say that your employer must pay in 3% of your salary, and you put in 4%. Add tax relief to your bit and you get an extra 1%. So that's 8% going into your pension altogether. Think about that for a minute. You put in 4%, but 8% actually goes in. That's a doubling of your money immediately, okay? Some employers, though, will increase their contribution if you do, up to a certain limit. So I have some clients paying in 9% of their salary because their employer will match to that level. I even have one client whose employer will double their contribution up to 9%. So he's putting in 9, the employer is putting in 18. Nice work if you can get it. Get the most amount of money out of your boss. That's simple, right? After that, pay everything else you have available to invest into an ISA and keep going like that for a few years. This will amass money outside of a pension. You're keeping your pension ticking over and that's growing nicely, but you're really building and focusing on your ISA, which, remember, your ISA is much more flexibly accessible should you need it. So many of you listening to this will be fans of the FIRE movement, Financial Independence, Retire Early, and you'll be wanting to work towards retiring early, maybe age 50 or even earlier. Well, if you do that and you can't access your pension until age 58, then there's a gap, right? You're going to need to access to some funds, and an ISA is perfect for that. So as you go through life, I would gradually even up the balance between pensions and ISA and eventually move in favor of your pension. The tax breaks for pensions, particularly for higher rate taxpayers, are so good, it definitely makes sense to tilt the balance towards them before too long. So I would err more towards ISAs if you're under 40 and then start the shift towards pensions around that point. But that is a huge generalization. So if you're unsure, seek professional advice, as I always say. It's why I have a job. Okay, number 4, allocate for access. So we've got 2 accounts on the go now. We've got a stocks and shares ISA and a pension. By the way, a SIP, you might have come across that term, that's just a pension with a few more bells and whistles. The 2 terms, SIP and pension, are not strictly interchangeable. A SIP is a type of pension, not just another name for one, okay? Important point. So we now need to decide what we're going to put into those accounts, and there are some things to think about here. So the first is your attitude to risk. Now, if you're a new investor, that phrase might be totally meaningless, and that is fine. To be honest, it's an advisory term. So as an advisor, I have to ascertain my client's attitude to risk so that I can recommend an investment to match. I'm going to go into more detail on risk the week after next, but when it comes to investing, what we're talking about is the risk of money going down in value, really, in very simple terms. There is more to it than that. I'll cover that in 2 weeks. So it's important to note that fluctuating values, your pension and ISA fund values going up and down, that's part and parcel of investing. You're going to need to be prepared potentially for quite big swings in the value of your investments over the short term on the way towards hopefully getting good returns over the long term. That's a key point, actually. The length of the term over which you're investing is a factor in the risk you should take. Longer term, higher risk generally, but still subject to your overall attitude to risk. So let's measure that first. The best way I know is to download an iOS app called Beam. So iPhone only, really sorry, Android users, which will do a great job at measuring your attitude to risk. There'll obviously be a link to that in the show notes. I will find there's a couple of free web versions, not of Beam itself, although that is coming. But there's a couple of free web risk profile questionnaires. I'll put links to those as well. I just can't remember them off the top of my head. But yes, the Beam app will be launching a web version, which obviously anybody will be able to access. So that's really exciting. So to put things very simply for now, the amount of risk that you're prepared to take is loosely correlated with the level of equities in your portfolio, how much equities you have. So if you take an attitude to risk test and you come out as balanced, say, right, then you might want to consider a balanced portfolio, which you could define as roughly half in shares, equities, and half in other stuff, bonds and things like that. Listen back to last week's Ultimate Guide on what things like equities and bonds mean, okay? If you're a more adventurous investor, you can dial up the equity content. If you're a more cautious investor, you can dial it back. But I would also overlay onto that the term that you're investing over. So if you're a balanced investor, but you're investing over 30 years into a pension, I think you could consider dialing up the equities, maybe to 70%, maybe even more. So your attitude to risk is your starting point, but then dial up or down the equities percentage based on the term. Little bit confusing to explain that, but I got a matrix in the workbook for this episode which might help you just think through the split of your assets. Okay, given that your ISA is more likely to be accessed earlier, depending on your life stage, then you would probably hold a bit less equities in that relative to your pension. Okay, so allocate for access. Because you're more likely to access your ISA earlier, dial back the risk on that, right? Just a little bit, so that if you do need to access it, you're not taking such a hit if things are bad at the time. Number 5 of 10. Okay, these are ultimate guides, remember. Buy passive multi-asset funds. So how do we actually invest within our pension or our ISA? Remember, we talked that they are just accounts, right? What's inside them? Well, I talked last week about funds, which are collective investment. You pool your money together with thousands of other investors to obtain buying power, cost reductions, and to get diversification. That is, spreading your assets around more widely. Last week, we also discussed the relative merits of active versus passive investing, so definitely listen back to that if you haven't yet. So I'm just going to cut to the chase and say that most people listening to this, you will be best served with a passive multi-asset fund. So these are funds which spread your money around for you across different asset classes, such as equities, bonds, and alternatives, and across the world into different countries. Essentially, they are an off-the-shelf portfolio done for you. Perfect for lazy investors like me, okay? They will spread the money wider and better and more cheaply than you could ever do yourself, and that is reason enough, I think, for most of us to choose them. Very often these funds are named according to their risk profile, so you might see words like balanced, adventurous, defensive, or conservative in the fund names. Or sometimes they're just numbered, like 1 to 5 or 1 to 7, which is a bit less helpful. But try to find one which matches your risk profile and your time scale. Now, rather than labor the point here, I've got a whole podcast episode dedicated to helping you choose a passive multi-asset fund. It's one of the most popular episodes I've ever done, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Show notes, remember, meaningfulmoney.tv/UG5. Okay, number 6, don't meddle. So once set up, it's so important that you resist the urge to second guess yourself and tinker with the money that you've put in for the long term. Remember, investing is for the long term. So fiddling with it and moving stuff around is likely to be counterproductive. If you choose a pension and an ISA and you set your payments up so they go out every month, and if you opt for an off-the-shelf multi-asset fund like I've just suggested, you shouldn't need to do any tinkering anyway. It should largely look after itself. The biggest difficulty you'll find is that as you get more interested in finance, you're more likely to be distracted by what's going on in the world and how it might affect your money. Nobody listens to the closing value of stock markets at 5:30 on Radio 2 if they don't have any money invested. But once you start to build wealth, then it's funny how interested you do suddenly get. But good investors learn not to have their heads turned by short-term news. If investing is for the long term, then what does the short term matter? It just doesn't. It's a key point that if investing is for the long term, then the short term doesn't matter. Ignore the news, keep your head down, and watch your wealth grow. Don't meddle. Don't tinker with your investments. Number 7, consider property, but keep it physical. So far, I haven't said much about property, so let's rectify that now. My good friend Andy Hart of the Maven Money podcast is a master of the pithy truism, and he says that the way to build wealth is with businesses and bricks. I really like that. So that's investing in shares or by owning your own business and by owning property. Now, property is a great asset class, but it isn't the panacea that everybody or that many people think it is. Its positives are that it is tangible, right? You can walk up to an investment property that you own and you can touch it. It's much harder to do that with lines of shareholdings or funds on a computer screen. And it feels more real as a result, and that tangibility tends to engender feelings of its value having some kind of permanence. That's not true, of course, right? The council could build a flyover nearby, or squatters could move in next door and set fire to the place. Also, property is not very tax efficient anymore. The government have systematically removed most of the tax breaks that they've given private landlords in the past. And then there's the hassle factor. You'll have tenants paying you rent. They might stop doing so, and then you'll have to do something about it. They might squat. You might have to go to court to kick them out. You will need to maintain the fabric of the building, probably refurbish it to some extent whenever you get a change in tenant. You're also liable for that building. There are all kinds of standards that you've got to adhere to, and if you fail in that regard, you're on the hook. Somebody dies because you missed something, you could potentially go to prison. And finally, property is illiquid, right? That means that it's difficult to convert quickly into cash should you need it. All that said, property does generally go up in value over time, but it usually needs to be over a long time. So it's a good investment for sure. There's no doubt about that. You just need to go into property investing with your eyes open, which is true of everything, isn't it, really? When I say to keep property physical, it is possible to invest in property through a fund, usually commercial property though. So things like car parks and shopping centres and leisure centres and stuff like that, office blocks. So you can invest through a fund just as you can invest in shares and bonds through a fund. And while that's not a bad idea per se, I would keep any such investment to a pretty small proportion of your whole invested amount, certainly less than 10%. And this is because property funds have some unique properties. Property funds have unique properties. And that means that sometimes you are precluded from getting your money out in a hurry. All right? You don't need to worry too much about the mechanics, but property funds have a special little clause that says that in certain circumstances, the fund management companies can stop you getting your money out for anything up to 6 months and sometimes longer. Okay, so be wary of that. Now, my good friends Rob Bentz and Rob Dix are the geniuses behind the Property Hub and the Property Podcast. There's tons more information, more than you could possibly shake a stick at, about property investing on their website. So I'll make sure there's a link in the notes to that. Those guys are the place to go. That didn't make any sense. Those guys are the place to go. You know what I mean. The Property Hub, outstanding resource. Okay, number 8 of 10, review annually. All right, it's a good idea to review your personal finances regularly. And when it comes to investments and pensions and all that stuff, you should do this really no more than annually, I would say. But a lot can happen in a year, and it's good to take stock of your current circumstances at the time of your review, whenever you do it, just to see if your current setup is still best placed, ideally suited for what you want it to do. So let's just think about an example. Well, a year ago, you were working for someone else, right? And you had a company pension at your old employer, and you were saving into an ISA too, so well done, great job. Since then, you've got engaged, and you've just found out that you're pregnant, both of you. You're expecting. Well, probably just one of you pregnant. You get the point, right? So this changes things somewhat. Oh, and by the way, you're now working freelance, all right? Not for somebody else, you're working for yourself, but you've got some brilliant clients, things are going well, and you're actually earning 50% more than you were a year ago. Now you need to take stock and consider a few things. Firstly, do you have enough life insurance, given that you're going to be responsible for a child soon? Listen back to the Ultimate Guide to Wealth Protection for more on that. There's a link in the notes. Next, your household income might dip if your partner goes on maternity leave, say, or if it's you and you go on maternity leave. What might that mean for your regular savings? Will you need to dip into money? Do you need to keep more cash on hand? Counterpoint to that, though, is that you're earning more now, you're working for yourself. So how do you balance all that out? You had an employer's pension a year ago. What happened to it when you left? Probably it's just frozen there. But what should you do with it? Should you open up a pension yourself and start contributing? Answer to that is yes, definitely. And you'll need to contribute more than you were because there's no boss paying in for you now. You should definitely look to see if it's worth shifting your old pension into your new one just to keep things tidy, but there's some caveats to that and some things to think about. Maybe with a baby coming along, you might want to move out into a garden office, might make working a bit easier, or maybe even move house so you've actually got an office to work from, a spare room or something. Will you or your partner change your work pattern long term? Will you both go back to work full time or what? In which case you might need to consider childcare. What's that going to cost? See what I mean? Life changes and then your finances need to change with it. And it's all too easy to drift. And in the more pressing day-to-day stuff of your life, kids, jobs, house, all that sort of stuff, it's easy to let pensions and ISAs and stuff drop out of the sort of important list. You know, we kind of keep our finances as something we'll get around to a bit before long. But don't do this. Set a date in your diary for an annual review and be prepared to review things on an ad hoc basis if life takes a really weird turn, like you lose your job or you get a diagnosis that means it's going to mean long-term changes. At the same time, you should check the makeup of your investment funds. So have your timescales changed? Remember we said about investing and timescale being a part of that. Well, you're a year further down the line, so that might make a difference. If you hold more than one fund, you might want to adjust the split between them back to how you wanted it or how you set it up, because they'll often get out of kilter. Maybe one will do better than another. That process of evening things up is called rebalancing. Be intentional. No one's going to do this for you. And if you really feel like you don't have the time or inclination to do it, just pay a professional financial advisor to do it for you. Okay, secret sauce for you. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. But what follows is the secret sauce to building wealth effectively over time. So are you ready? Listen up. There is magic in frequent small increments. Okay, Pete, that's not very helpful. What do you mean by that? Well, I'm going back to being intentional. Okay, so let's say you set up a pension payment of £100 a month and you feel great about yourself. You've taken action. You should be pleased with yourself. It's great. Slightly painful each month to make that payment of £100 a month, but you know, you've set it up to go out as soon as you get paid, so you don't really think about it. And after a month or two, you don't even notice that money going out. Fast forward 10 years, and you're still paying £100 a month into your pension, despite the fact that you're earning 3 times what you did 10 years ago. Well, that is no good at all. So what you should do instead is set a date in your calendar 3 months after setting up your pension and increase your payment to £110 per month, just 10 quid a month more. I guarantee you won't feel it, and yet there's now an extra £120 a year going in. 3 months after that, increase the payment again. Put it up to £120 or £125 per month. Rinse and repeat. Keep doing that until your eyes start watering. Okay? At the point at which it's painful, that's about the right level you could do with saving at, really, to really build wealth for the future. As soon as it gets comfortable and you stop thinking about it, that's when you need to step it up. Now, if you get a pay rise or a bonus or you change jobs for more money, take stock and reset the level of your savings accordingly. If something happens that your income goes down, you can change it down. This really is compounding in action. What you're doing is you're pushing the snowball a little bit harder and further whenever you increment your payments, and that will very literally pay dividends in the future. You will increase the level of your wealth multiple times compared with just setting and forgetting. Actually, let me be clear. You should set and forget your investment choices, perhaps just rebalancing once a year if you hold more than one fund inside your pension or your ISA. You should not set and forget the level of your savings payments. Those should be reviewed regularly. Remember, you can always dial things back if things are tight for a period. Pension and ISA providers are really very flexible like that. And most of the management is done online anyway, so you just log in and dial your payments up or down. Frequent small increments are powerful. Here's a 30-year example, okay? You put £100 a month into an investment for 30 years, and it grows by 6% a year. At the end of the term, you'll have £100,562. Not bad. If you increase your payment by £10 per month once a year, so there's an extra 120 quid going in each year, you will double what you've got at the end to £204,565. If you increase by £10 a month every 3 months, you'll end up with £375,654. If you want to think about it another way and you increase by 10% a year rather than by £10 a month, you'll end up with £372,247. Not bad. Obviously, you'll have put a lot more money away, but that means there's more in the pot to compound. That's kind of the point, right? So regular increments for the win. Set a date in your diary now and make the increase. Full disclosure, I literally did this myself this week, increasing mine and Joe's pension payments by an extra 50 quid a month each. You can do it too. Increments don't have to be big, they can be small. But you will thank yourself in future, I promise. Okay, 10 out of 10, finally. Stay focused. Staying the course takes effort. It's really easy to take your foot off the gas and just coast along. You never increment your savings rate. You never really check your funds are still in the right place. You're kind of looking for the perfect balance between not obsessing about your money, which often leads to inertia and decision fatigue, and staying just interested enough to keep on top of things. It's so easy to be distracted too. You know, our Facebook feeds are filled with shiny new things to buy. Our Instagram feeds are full of enticing holiday destination. And Alan down the pub is crying about how he made 20% in a weekend using some trading site that he found online. Building wealth is both boring and exhilarating. The process of investing should be boring. The results and what it makes possible one day is the exciting bit. So don't let your head get turned by fad investments and stuff that just comes across your consciousness and you think, well, I'll give that a go. Just don't do it. Stick to mainstream, passive, multi-asset funds, as we've talked about, inside a pension and an ISA. If you really, really do want to try out the other stuff, stick to just a tiny proportion of your total wealth so that if it goes south, you're not completely shipwrecked. Find like-minded people and share stories. It's never been easier to do that thanks to the internet. Start to dream about what money might make possible for you. Remember, it's never an end in itself. It's there to serve your life goals, whether that's early retirement, working part-time and traveling half the year, spending more time with your kids. Whatever a successful life means to you, money can help make that possible. So get excited about that rather than the process of growing the money itself. Keep listening to this podcast. Follow other shows like it. Read some good books. Talk about this stuff with your partner and try and get on the same page. Join the Meaningful Money community on Facebook. Over 5,000 like-minded people heading in the same direction as you are. meaningfulmoney.tv/community, by the way. Time flies, folks. Before you know it, you're going to be staring down the barrel of retirement, thinking you were glad you listened to this show today and you took action to increase your pension and ISA payments. All right? Let me know that you've done it. So there you have it, folks. A 2-part ultimate guide to investing. I just know that I'll listen back to it and wish I'd mentioned X or Y. But fortunately, there's tons more information at meaningfulmoney.tv to fill in any gaps. And remember, you can leave any questions at the show notes or under the video on YouTube here, and I'll do my best to answer them. And in the Facebook group, meaningfulmoney.tv/community. Also, though, to celebrate this season of Ultimate Guides, I'm doing a special offer on the Meaningful Academy. And so this next few weeks of Ultimate Guides really lend themselves to the build wealth phase of the Academy, which is the phase for folks who are looking to understand investments, pursue financial independence. I even show you how to use free tools like Morningstar to choose the right funds for you. You'll find guides, calculators, video lessons about choosing investments, financial planning, behavioral finance, and there's a year's access to the best financial planning app in the world. Map out your financial future using the app called Voyant Go. Really everything that you need to get your finances on the right footing and take quick action to move forward. And there's a private Facebook group as part of the Academy, so you can ask questions in a safe place from people who are in a similar position to you. So if you want to take radical action quickly, Meaningful Academy is the best place to learn how to do that. To find out more, go to meaningfulacademy.com/specialbw, right? meaningfulacademy.com/specialbw. The details are on the screen now. The special price will expire at midnight on the 4th of December 2020. Okay, here's a review from Newander21, headlined, "Thanks for keeping me sane. From one disillusioned electronics engineer to another." Did you know I did an electronics degree? I say did one. Failed my second year, never finished it. So, from one disillusioned electronics engineer to another, over the last 5 years, your honest advice have been a lifeline. During the Brexit and COVID media hysteria, your podcast has been a safe space, and now I have the confidence to tell my IFA what to do with my investments. Great work. Thanks, Chris. I bet your IFA is cursing me, mind. But I'm glad you feel empowered. Really important, right? Too many advisors rely on clients' willing ignorance, if you like. So the best kind of advisor-client relationship is a collaborative one. So I'm glad that you're able to have better conversations with your advisor. Chris, Newander21, thank you so much. Thank you for leaving a review. If you want to do the same, meaningfulmoney.tv/love is the place to go to do that. Okay, it helps others to hear about the show and to subscribe because it keeps the show near the top of the rankings. If you're watching on YouTube, hit a like and hit subscribe. That will really help me out too. We're closing in on 10,000 subs before too long. God, my voice goes at the end of these. We're sort of 30-odd minutes in. I could definitely feel the strain. Next week, we're going to be talking about the ultimate guide to wrappers and platforms. Essentially, it's part 3 of the investing guide, but it also will stand alone. And that is it, folks. So I'll bring up the music and hope that you enjoyed it. Hope it was helpful, rather. Comments, questions, meaningfulmoney.tv/UG5. All the notes and links, including the workbook, are there. Definitely check it out. Hope you enjoyed it, folks. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you next time. Cheers.